Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to the very first session here at the ITF 2019 in Leipzig. Delighted to have you all here. This session is called Prosperity Through Connectivity, Tourism and Regional Sustainable Development. My name is Ali Aslan. I'm a presenter based in Berlin, Germany. I have the great pleasure of moderating this distinguished panel. And this panel will examine the impact of increased connectivity on tourism growth and sustainable development. And of course, we'll show examples of where tourism has increased as a result of improving connectivity. I have a wonderful panel here with us. To my right, he's the Minister of Transport and Local Government of Iceland, a country that has seen a major upsurge in tourism in the recent years. Minister Sigurður Ingo Johannsson is with us. To my left, we have the head of the Regional Development and Tourism Division at the OECD, Alain Dupeiras, who will also kick off the session in just a moment. Delighted to welcome the president of the Korean Transport Institute with us, Jack Oh. Great to have the Director of Government and Industry Affairs at Etihad Airways with us, Adrian Gain. And last but certainly not least, the Transport Councillor, the Councillor for the Transport of the City of Cape Town in South Africa, Angus McKinsey, is here. Very much looking forward to a lively exchange. All of your cities, all of your countries have seen an upsurge in tourism, and very much curious to see how that has affected your country and, of course, the transportation system. But before we do, Alain Dupeiras will kick off this session with a scene setting. Alain, the floor is yours.
Yeah,
of course.
This one, yeah?
Yep, perfect. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. So I'm the head of Regional Development and Tourism. We just have recently a ministerial meeting on regional policy, and I think this session is also about linking different policy areas, regional policy, tourism, transport policy, and I think in itself it's a very good opportunity to have this discussion. Trends in tourism growth are impressive, and we speak about a growth of 3 to 4% per year in the coming decade, and this is happening more or less since the 1950s. So, you know, we have about more than 1.2 billion tourists now. And of course, the forecast for growth in passenger numbers are reflecting this and are also very significant. And these are some figures. Some of these have been provided by the International Transport Forum. So I think the discussion today is very much about how to make tourism as a vehicle for regional and economic local development, and also what is the role of transport in doing this. So in my very brief introduction to our discussion, I think we have to start by saying that transport is a key enabler of tourism, because it brings tourists, consumers, the visitors to the destination and to the various attractions. And in doing this, the location, the capacity, the efficiency, but also the connectivity of transport, all of these factors play an important role in how a destination develops. The ambition of transport stakeholders to provide seamless transport is very important for tourism and can give visitors a highly convenient and enjoyable travel experience. And delivering that type of seamless transportation can really help destinations to grow their tourism economy. A few things. Yes, transport systems are influencing a lot destination development. Good accessibility, in fact, is everything for tourism. This is what makes the overall competitiveness of destination. And the provision of the suitable transport infrastructure and the adequate means of transportation are fundamental requirements to facilitate the mobility of tourists. This sounds like quite an evidence, but I think this is important to recall everybody about this at the beginning of this discussion. So tourism is very dependent on multimodal transport system that offer, as I said, convenience, accessibility, capacity, and connectivity for different type of destination, because we can think about a fully integrated resort with, mass tourism, but we should also take care about small villages, remote areas, and here this is, of course, a little bit a different story. If we take, for example, the example of aviation, and the minister from Iceland will speak later, and I think aviation in Iceland has been playing the driving force for tourism development. We, of course, know that aviation has been playing a critical role in destination development, in particular if you take Europe, but not only the development of low-cost carriers. This has been playing a lot of role. We have multiple examples of good practices where transport and tourism and regional policy connect together to improve visitor mobility. Here, for example, we can take the national tourist route in Norway, which attract both international and domestic tourism, and the development of this route have been helping to revigorate little village and towns in rural areas. The same is true with the example of Ireland. Transport system can also play an important role in influencing more sustainable transport choice. For example, by promoting the development of intermodal hubs and gateways, transport policies can be used to attract, manage, and direct visitor flows to particular destinations and to facilitate change to eco-friendly transport options. Making public transport easier to use by tourists is also a main challenge for many cities, but also encouraging a greater use of human-powered mobility in big cities like Paris, London, and others. We could think about cycling, we could think about walking, and how public transport services can help to the visitor to make his choice. Sustainable tourism based around walking, cycling, for instance, requires a very close collaboration between transport providers, local and regional authorities, but also tourism to put the appropriate infrastructure in place. And this is quite complex to implement. So we may have a little bit of discussion on these issues. But also, we need to ensure good linkages with traditional transport services, for example, for intercity travel, and this is fundamental to provide this sustainable tourism experience. Some OECD countries are at the leading front there, like in Switzerland, with Switzerland Mobility. I remember some years ago we made already a detailed presentation about the Switzerland Mobility design and operation, but also Alpinfo, for example, in Slovenia. And we have many other systems of integration which have been proven to be very important. To finish this introduction, I would just like to say that there are numerous factors that can help to provide a positive and relatively seamless transport experience for tourists and residents alike. This, for example, has to do with network design, when routes and timetable of various modes are coordinated with each other to provide more convenient transfer services. Information provision, I think there is a lot we can do there to help the visitor or the international visitor in particular to travel within a country. It's about clear information on ticketing, payment option, different languages option, and so on. And some destinations are already doing very well there. Electronic ticketing, smart cards, this is something which is in rapid development everywhere. Here I mentioned Switzerland or Korea smart card also. And they can make really travel much more convenient. They can enhance the attractiveness of a destination. This is important. But they can also encourage the use of public transport, which is critical to reduce congestion, for example. And of course, we should not forget about improve accessibility in general. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Along the line, my voice is loud enough, and I think this room is small enough for me to be heard either way. Thank you so much for kicking off this session. Indeed, many valuable points that you have provided us with that we're going to incorporate now, of course, into the discussion. Minister Johansson, your country has seen a major increase in tourism as of late. I think it's fair to say that perhaps 10, 15 years ago, your country was, if anything, a minor destination for tourism, perhaps for most people traveling from Europe with a stopover to the United States. Now it's become one of the hotspots. Of course, that is great news, but it also brings certain challenges with it. How has Iceland changed? What have you done in order to respond to this major increase within a very short amount of time?
Yeah, thank you. The tourism has in recent years become of the most important economic sector in Iceland, actually. And in 2017, it contributed with 42% of the foreign currency income of the economy, surpassing the two traditionally strong sectors, industry and fishery, by a substantial amount. And I can safely say that it's the single most important factor in the recovery of the Icelandic economy after the economic meltdown of 2008. It has seen staggering growth number year after year since 2010. In 2010, actually, we had around 500,000 visitors in Iceland, but 8 years later, last year, they had reached 2.5 million. The most likely explanation for this consists is a number of factors, of course, not one thing. We've been exposed to an unusual worldwide news coverage, one being the collapse of the banking system in 2009. It's not always bad to have bad news. The eruption of Eyjafjallajökull caused a great havoc for air transport of millions of people in Europe and elsewhere, while at the same time being a spectacular natural event with amazing pictures that was shared almost live through social media and all over the world. The financial collapse led also to a devaluation of the Icelandic krona, which resulted in a competitive price level compared to neighboring countries, which was a chance for Iceland that had before a reputation of being expensive destination. And I may also say that the government also deserves credit for initiating advertising campaigns such as Inspired by Iceland, I think many know, and for offering financial incentives for filmmakers who have seized the opportunity and filmed internationally popular movies and TV series such as Game of Thrones, and capitalizing the natural beauty of the country. And as a result, the Icelandic transport infrastructure was trusted with task of welcoming and serving a growing number of visitors and allow them to safely explore the country. The most visitors to Iceland begin the visit at the airport in Keflavik. And the Icelandic Airlines have long, as you mentioned, used its advantageous geographical position in the middle of Europe and US to offer low-cost flights connecting the two continents, and especially by connecting smaller cities on both sides of the Atlantic that otherwise were considered too small to have detected long-distance overseas connection. And in that way, in 2010, it was 10 airlines provide scheduled flights to Keflavik. Last year, there were over 30. So, although we welcome the airport balance sheet and the increased traffic created a challenge for the airport facilities, the airport facilities have time needed to be creative to accommodate unexpected growth within a limited time frame. They have increased the capacity of terminal facilities and number of aprons for serving a fast-growing number of aircraft and passengers. And as I'm sure most of you know, the planning, designing and financing of a major airport improvements, it's a time-consuming and complicated affair. And we are now working according to some we call Keflavik Master Plan and increase the capacity of the airport to 14 million passengers by year 2040. It was 2 million in 2004, almost 10 million through Keflavik last year. At the same time, the growth of the tourism in Iceland has also increased the traffic load on the road system. And in some part of the country, the proportional increase is without precedence, 4 times, 5 times more than earlier. And all this puts increased pressure on the maintenance and to invest in improved and upgraded infrastructure. Increased traffic and emphasis on all-round the year tourism lead the need for greatly increased service, especially during winter. Because driving in Iceland during winter is a whole new experience for a lot of people. Most foreign visitors, but not least due to very unpredictable weather conditions. We say this in Iceland, if you don't like the weather in Iceland, just wait a second or 10 seconds, it changes. So we can say that we are putting more money into investment and hopefully we will see growth, but I think it's fair enough to say that the growth should not be 30–40% per year. It's more healthy to have 2 or 3%.
So we learned that Game of Thrones is not just a major hit for HBO, but also for Iceland. So that's good news. And you pointed out that the banking crisis, ironically, so there's no such thing as bad news. We just found out. It certainly elevated Iceland to another level. But very impressive numbers that you have put forth. And with that success, with that being a destination, come also perhaps certain pitfalls. We'll talk about that in just a moment because it is about sustainability at the end of the day. Jaako, I want to bring you in here as the president of the Korean Transport Institute, another country, Korea, which has also, looking at the numbers, seen a major increase in tourism, also was somewhat undiscovered for many years. Now it's very much on the map. As the president of the Korean Transport Institute, I'm sure that brought some challenges with it.
Okay. The topic, the major theme, which I would like to raise in this morning is about the relationship between the high-speed railway and tourism and regional development. Okay, this is a very big topic, but I try to make it very simple. I think it's the high-speed railway now has been 15 years since its operation, all right? And the high-speed railway converted the South Korea into one megacity within 2 hours, okay? So now the whole country works like a big megacity rather than the many cities, okay? So in general, there are many positive, some negative impacts from the operation of the high-speed railway in Korea. But in general, much of them are positive impacts, and then some minor negative impacts. So that's why the most of, maybe all of the local cities and the local politicians want to invite high-speed railway station to their cities. Very high competition to invite, all right? And one of the, in relation to tourism, for example, in the past, for example, the foreign visitors usually spend time around the Seoul metropolitan area. Not easy to go down. But after the high-speed railway operation, the foreign tourists are very easy, comfortable to go down. And then maybe the one-day trip or several-day trip, they return. It's quite easily their trip is completed, all right? So another thing is the MICE industry. In the past, for example, 2003, most of the international conference, international convention activities, done organized in Seoul metropolitan city, Seoul city. But now maybe at that time it's about 80% of the conventional activities done within Seoul metropolitan area. Now, after the high-speed railway operation, now it's about 50 to 50%. Half of the international seminars are held in the local cities other than Seoul city. That is very positive things. And we may have many local cities are worrying about some kind of the negative impact, all right? Which is we call it straw effects. Maybe the economic activities may be further centralized to the capital region, okay? But actually, in 15 years' time, it didn't happen. So at this stage, everybody is happy about that. Of course, it's the local cities, regional cities, they tried, they have their best effort not to be behind it from the competition with the other cities, all right? And to maximize the impacts of the high-speed railway operation to the local cities, I think it's especially in transport connectivity or integration is very, very important. As you said already, seamless transportation through the better integration of the operation and the mode is very, very important. Of course, the fare system. For example, in Korea, you can use the one payment card for whole country, whole mode, very easy. Even you can use your credit card directly. You can pay your bus fares or the railway fares, everything, with your credit card very easily. So the integration, seamless transportation service is very important, especially from the railway station, major railway station, to the other local attraction point. The accessibility is quite important, I think. I may later discuss further about several more things. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Most definitely. We will come back, of course, to do a couple more rounds. Thank you so much for this assessment. And yes, I think you summed it up quite well when you said the surge in tourism has been vastly great in terms of, but there's some downsides as well at the end of the day, and we'll get to them in just a moment. Another place, of course, is the UAE. UAE has positioned positioned itself as a country in many ways as a major tourist destination. Many people will probably think of Dubai at first, but Abu Dhabi, of course, is always and also a major factor here. That's why I'm very pleased to welcome Adrian Gagne of Etihad Airways. Adrian, Etihad Airways, without transport, we heard it in the initial statements, there is no tourism, and you are playing here a very major role, of course. What about the sustainability factor, though? These days, when we talk about flights and carbon footprints, what's your take?
Okay. Well, morning, everybody. Those behind me, very good to be here. Thank you for having me on. Feels a bit like a train carriage, actually. I'm not quite sure who's looking at who. So I'll just cover Abu Dhabi. I've got to have a plug for Abu Dhabi, and then I'll talk about sustainability. You're absolutely right. Traditionally, no one knew where Abu Dhabi was. We knew Dubai. Everybody went on holiday to Dubai, transited through Abu Dhabi. Where is Abu Dhabi? And I remember I went to UAE 10 years ago, and my family and all my friends in England said, Abu Dhabi, where is that? Now they know, hopefully all of you know where Abu Dhabi is now, just about an hour and a half from Dubai. So the leadership there decided they needed tourism, part of their strategic plan for diversifying the economy, and they set about building the infrastructure on the basis of you build it and they'll come. So they built hotels, amusement parks, cultural attractions, but in a very understated way. Abu Dhabi is possibly a bit less buccaneering than Dubai, if you like. It's a bit like Washington and New York. There's a parallel there. And in 2015, we had 300,000 hotel visitors. Last year, we had 5 million. So it really is beginning to take off now. And as you said, the airline is part of it. The airline is 15 years old. That's a key enabler. We have cruise ships with our cruise partners coming in now, so that all helps it. But the sustainability is what you asked about. So I'm not avoiding the question. That is a problem for the whole industry. We have to really think about that. So there are two parts of it in mind. One is local sustainability, where we dump a lot of tourists into a town or a village that can't cope. And there are plenty of examples around the world that we can all point to, where there just isn't enough facility or it's very seasonal. But the second issue, to my mind, and certainly it's very much at the forefront of our thinking in the aviation industry, is how we grow sustainably when more and more countries and organizations and thinking after Paris climate change are looking for a zero carbon economy by 2050, some people are saying 2030. How do we do that? And aviation is fundamentally a dirty business. It produces CO2. Electric planes are not quite there yet because they can't travel distances with the weight. You could probably get one person an hour, but you can't get 500 people 14 hours. So it's just not going to happen. So the answer is the industry is coming up with a plan to halve its emissions, which is by 2050, that's the target, to halve the emissions compared to 2009, which is a huge target in itself when you think that, as Elaine showed, aviation will double by the mid-30s, 2030s. So that's quite a big target. But many people are saying that's not enough, we have to go further. The answer will be in biofuels, sustainable aviation fuels, and eventually new technology. And that's probably the way we've got to go. So we are very conscious, and we are leading that in Abu Dhabi. We are making jet fuel out of seawater plants, and we are looking at making jet fuel from household waste. So that's the sort of thing we're thinking about. Maybe we can talk about that later. So, I mean, it's an exciting story for Abu Dhabi. It's great for them, and it builds up the future for them when oil runs out. The only final thing I'd say is the way they're doing it is very interesting. That the millennial generation are my children. When they come, they don't really want to look at the museum and go around the streets. They want to meet Emiratis and find out what makes them tick. And Abu Dhabi has been very good at that. They have a lot of cultural interaction for tourists coming into Abu Dhabi. And I know this is something they do a lot everywhere in the world. People want experiences now. They don't want just to go to the shopping mall. And that's, I think, another part of sustainability.
Sustainability, thank you so much for addressing the answer, especially saying that Etihad Airways has this issue on their agenda, as many airlines must move in forward. Thank you so much. Now, we did a little tourism incursion ourselves. We started in Iceland, went to Korea, made a stop in the Gulf region, and then now we're going to head over to Africa. And very much down to the south. Very much pleased to welcome Agnes McKinsey, who is representing the city, beautiful city of Cape Town, of course, another city that's very much on the map, very much on the agenda of many people visiting the continent. Angus, what's been the experience in Cape Town?
Look, thank you very much and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I must just say to Finland, I think it's an example that many countries can actually learn from, that through adversity and through challenges, there's a huge positive that can come out of it. It obviously takes collaboration and working together with all critical stakeholders to ensure that that happens. And I think South Africa has, over many years, because of our past, taken our past and actually created some sort of positivity out of it, because the world was very interested to understand how it is that a country that faced the challenges that it faced through apartheid, through the discrimination of our people, and through the various forms of, that took up. Lots of people from around the world wanted to make their way to South Africa, and that really laid the foundation for what Cape Town has effectively become the gateway to Africa. And we've had airlines such as Etihad, for an example, that has really assisted Cape Town and South Africa as a country in driving tourists to the destination. And I think the big challenge with Cape Town is that you sit with a city that is 12, 13 hours away from Europe, 15, 16 hours away from America. And it's taken us, I think, almost 20 years now to eventually just sign an agreement with United Airlines just recently that will see a direct flight from America into Cape Town, which is going to drive American tourists into the city as well. But being the most southern tip of Africa, being having our history and our apartheid history that is of interest to many people, besides having the most amazing beaches in the world, because we nestled between the southern and the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, and you in close proximity of yourself, you're able to pop over to one ocean to the next ocean. There's also the people and the culture. And sadly, what has happened in South Africa is that due to apartheid and the Group Areas Act of 1967, we moved and relocated people out of city centers where the opportunities for work were, and we moved them further and further away from the city. What that did for us today is that it's put huge pressure on the transport sector in our country, because there is no you're not going to have a successful tourism industry if you don't have a successful transport infrastructure program in place. So trying now to link those two has been a huge challenge for Cape Town. It's been a huge challenge for the country of South Africa. And while we have millions of people now coming into our airport from all across the world, with various airlines, including Etihad, bringing people there, getting those people around our city is still very difficult. And so over the last 4 or 5 years, we created what was called the My City bus system in Cape Town, which very quickly has become a very successful mode of transport, taking international people in and around the city, but also ensuring that local people that historically were forced further away from work opportunities and school opportunities and just being near the city center, bringing those people closer together. And when we speak about route management and network management, something that the My City system has done extremely well in, because what we've driven is that during the peak times of the system, we wanted to, and we are happy to see that locals are using the system during the peak times, which makes sure that it's constantly running and that we're generating the income needed to generate from it. But then during the off-peak periods is when we see the vast majority of tourists using it. So in terms of the route management, even the locals are getting an opportunity to drive past tourist attractions on their way to and from work, which now the tourists on the off-peak periods are able to stop, enjoy those experiences, get back on the bus, move on to the next system. The challenge that we have going forward, though, is that the My City bus system is a brilliant bus system, but it doesn't speak to the challenges that still face the people of Cape Town. We have a transport system in Cape Town that is basically near collapse because of the far length distances people need to come to and from work with. And so you have close to 300,000 people that on a daily basis ordinarily should make use of the rail system in the country. But because of the collapse within the system, we're finding that more and more people are choosing to get onto the road, which clogs our roads up, which creates even bigger transport issues. And then you have the mixture of vehicular traffic as well as truck traffic on our roads, causing even bigger problems for people. So because Cape Town and South Africa has it's a melting pot of cultures, we also have the sad situation where the rich in our country get richer and the poor in our country is getting poorer. And the people that need public transport the most within our country are people that can't actually afford to have their own vehicle to get onto the cars. And so, like Cape Town, there are many cities across the world that is really struggling with the transportation of lower LSM'd individuals, getting them from A to B in a safe, reliable form. And so what's important for us is to be able to link up our tourism sector with what exactly is happening in our local communities, so that we are driving tourists into our local communities so that they experience not just the beautiful beaches and the beautiful Table Mountain, but that they actually experience Cape Town as a culture, but also then for that system of driving tourists into local communities to benefit the local communities in being able to travel and transport around the city centre as well. So that's where we're hoping to take the MyCity bus system to. But we need to be realistic to say, is buses the only form of transport that can do that? Do we need to look at the upgrading of our rail system? Do we need to look at something as successful as a tram system, which you have in Leipzig? Is that a possibility for driving it in South Africa as well? We are a new country. I mean, we've really only been in a democratic process since 1994. We've achieved so much. We've had the Rugby World Cup in South Africa in 2010. That proved not just to the world, but it proved to South Africans that we are able to do it. We are able to bring tourists, millions of tourists into our country, give them the best experience, have locals benefit from that experience as well. We've had the Rugby World Cup, we've had the Cricket World Cup, we've had these major events. It is now important for us to collaborate with role players from across the world, people like Etihad, people like yourself, to understand how it is you've done it and to be able to implement those similar practices within a country like South Africa and a city like South Africa, because there's clearly a need to want to be there. And so we need to make sure that when you get there, we are able to service you to the best of our ability.
So clearly learning from one another, this is what the ITF is all about at the end of the day, about the various experiences that you're all encountering. I see some challenges still remain in South Africa, despite or because of the growth that you are encountering, working very hard to fill that gap in the transport system. Alan, we just heard from various gentlemen all at the forefront of trying to make their country, their city, open to tourism, more sustainable, more exclusive for tourism, particularly when it comes to transportation. What's your advice to them?
I think.
First, we'll take the mic.
Yeah. I think when we are hearing you, I think it's very clear that tourism and transport are both complex systems, so to say, and that here we need all of us to work collectively together at national level, at local level, private sector, aviation, but also tourism, which is not there today, but also transport institute. And I think this is a main lesson that we have. And it seems an evidence, but it's quite difficult, you know. And at the end of the day, if we want to make tourism and transport, or transport for tourism, or whatever you call it, more sustainable and inclusive, not only at the macro level, but also at the destination and local level, I think we have to develop kind of what I would call integrated strategies, integrated planning, which is linking, you know, all of these areas together. I was meeting yesterday one of a colleague who was coming from Denmark, who was coming to the OECD forum in Paris, which is happening these days, and we were having such a discussion about a big project investment for the future that Denmark is now putting in place within the Ministry of Business and innovation. And this is very much about choosing a specific territory and bringing all the stakeholders together and seeing how you can use the existing transport infrastructure, for example, but, you know, you spoke a lot about high-speed railway. We know this a lot in France, you know, because we had the same kind of competition. But it's not only about bringing people to a specific city, but then what do you do with these people? How do you bring them to the local destination? And how, in the end, you develop tourism in the local destination to give benefits to the local people. And this is where it is becoming challenging, because this is very much about small businesses or small transport operators. It's about agriculture, it's about culture. You mentioned culture. Culture is very important. You know, when I discuss with some Icelandic colleagues, many Icelandic people are a little bit upset with growth of tourism, especially in Reykjavik, because they think it's just too much, you know, for a small little community. So how can you manage this issue of over-tourism, which in the end we will not be successful into this? It's when we are able to better spread tourism within the territory. And to do this, we need all of us to work together, to think more strategically, to think longer term, you know, because both transport and tourism requires a long-term perspective. Tourism is using a lot of natural and cultural resources, you know, which are public goods, you know. And so if we do not have this long-term perspective and a common vision from the national to the local, we will never achieve. So I think that would be a main message that we could have from this discussion, and let's work together, you know, in a way.
And that's a perfect segue to Minister Johansson, of course, because Minister Johansson, in your initial statement, you have pointed out correctly that how good tourism has been for your economy and perhaps even for the perception image of your country. But as we just heard from Alain Dupé-Russ, there's also been some backlash from the local community because the interests of the local population, tourism, don't necessarily always align, particularly when it comes to transportation. How have you been responding to that?
Well, how are we responding to that? That is a good question. One thing is trying to open up more gates into Iceland, not only Keflavik Airport, because people traveling to Iceland perhaps stay there 4 days, 1 week, something. If they are staying for a short time, Iceland is a relatively big country, so they don't travel so far. So the pressure will then be mostly in Reykjavik and then the south coast area. Of course, these regions have benefited a lot, especially in the south coast line or the road. Building up new services, restaurants and other things that both local can use, not only in the summertime, but when we put this campaign on to travel to Iceland all year round. So we now have services open all year round in those areas. But in other areas, in the northern part, the west fjords and east, there are some difficulties. We have airports, both in Akureyri and Egilsstaðir, which can be used, but it is difficult to get bigger air companies to fly there. We have been trying to work with them, and some are actually going to Akureyri, and then you can see the same upbuilding there as we saw in the capital Reykjavik and there around. Other things are, of course, that the locals get more opportunity in jobs and connections with people from all over the world. So, but it must be held hand in hand. You cannot just put a lot of tourists in some area and not having the infrastructure. But on the other hand, coming from the government, you have always pressure to build up infrastructure all over the country. So you are always a little bit behind. you get the tourists first, and then you will build up the infrastructure. And you have to try to make that time gap so short as possible, because if you don't, then the pressure on the locals will be negative, I think.
And as Alan Dupeira said, we need to integrate the transport and the tourism policies at the end of the day. Oftentimes the transport minister is not the tourist minister. There are sometimes conflicting interests, perhaps.
Yeah, there are. And of course, in our investment plans in the road system, we are looking into where are the most important and interesting places where the tourist is going, because we have to build up those roads perhaps even earlier than we were expected to do. At the same time, it's a very important thing, and we are putting a lot of impact on that safety is one of the key issues in tourism, but also in transport, both for locals but also for the tourists. So that has been our most important thing to work on now. At the same time, we are building up the infrastructure, a little bit behind because of a lot of this tourist blooming. But at the same time, to get more safety, and I am proud to say that it has never been as safe to travel as tourists in Iceland on the Icelandic road as now. But we are aiming higher. We want to be one of the top 5 in Europe, as we were 10 years ago, when there were less tourists and even less roads. But then the people who were traveling there knew the weather, knew the roads. So it was a new challenge, but I think we are coming through with that. But that's a very important thing for tourism, that the safety is guarded.
Jacko, you have been kind enough to provide us an overview of, as the president of the Korean Transport Institute, of the developments that we have seen, the positive developments we have seen in your country, particularly in interlinking people, tourists, but also, as I understand, from within Korea, making it rather disconnected areas into one big frame, which is easily accessible. What challenges do still remain from your point of view?
Yes, I think it's the transport infrastructure, transport connectivity does not automatically guarantee the success of the tourism and the success of the regional development, I think. So maybe the transport connectivity is one of the basic necessary condition. Okay. So at the same time, according to my research and my experiences from the high-speed railway and the regional development, I think it's the willingness, the consistent effort from the local government along with the local people, cooperation together, is most important key condition for the success of the regional development and the tourism from the infrastructure investment, I think. So now is the high-speed railway roughly covers about 85% of the Korean people and over maybe 65-70% of the territory to be served by the high-speed railway. So it making a lot of opportunities for tourism. But as you said, in Korea, in the past, tourism and transport are within the same ministry. But now the tourism went to the Ministry of Culture. Yeah. So I think it's of course, it's the transport. It does not mean automatically the tourism, but in my sense, is without good transportation service, connectivity, or the affordable charge, I think it's the people might not easy to go down to the remote area, remote cities from the capital city, I think. So the construction is not everything. the operation, especially the operation for the sake of the users, travelers. We need to improve step by step, gradually, to satisfy the user's need. Okay, whatever the transportation, whatever the tourism or other activities. You know, the we call transportation demand is the kind of the demand derived from the other activities. Okay, so transportation is the basic condition. It does not mean economic activities or tourism. All right, so we need the more the package or complete the combined effort to make the better tourism, better regional development, something like this. I think it will take time, long way. Okay, the consistently. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
There's still a way to go.
I think it's still another 20, 30 years. I think so, yeah.
Well, we'll be around for that. That's for certain. We'll closely follow the developments, and not just in 10, 20, 30 years, but also within the next 2 or 3 days, when Korea, of course, is the partner country of this year's ITF. Adrian Game, we just heard that Alan is saying at the end of the day, if you want sustainable, successful tourism, basically, you need to integrate the tourism and transportation needs and policies. You need to come to some form of cooperation. What does it look like in Abu Dhabi?
Well, we're very lucky in Abu Dhabi in that we have a very far-sighted government that has its ministry options all integrated. So we're very lucky to be able to integrate the transport and the tourism, and they work generally very closely. And there are always problems, but it's difficult, but generally we get it right. So we're quite lucky. I think the issues that are coming up earlier, which interested me, are in terms of local sustainability on the transport. That's fine, but there are other issues in terms of cultural sustainability, because often you dump a whole load of people into a small place, as the minister was saying, and it can be difficult. And in Abu Dhabi, we have had a lot of tourists coming into quite a local town, and that can give you issues of how to integrate and how to accommodate it.
Has there been backlash?
No, there hasn't actually, but there are always frustrations because the tourists don't understand that the visitors have to conform to a certain set of standards, and the locals have to understand that they have to try and give way occasionally to allow them to access sites. So that can be a problem, and I think that's a problem everywhere. And then you've got the problem of what to do about the seasons, because we have two seasons in the Middle East. It's very hot for most of the year, so people don't want to come. So it's a bit like an alpine ski village. What do you do with the ski lifts in the summer? We've got the same problem, so we're having to readapt. So then that creates more transport problems. You've got to have very good integrated transport systems. Now, you probably realise Dubai have a very good year-round transport system, public transport system, which Abu Dhabi is also working on as well. They have very good public transport. But again, those things have to be thought about when you think about a master plan. So those are some of the issues which we have at the moment.
Angus, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, look, I think the impact on local communities it's very critical. And if one looks at the Cape Town, South Africa situation, we have a very high number of unemployed people within our communities, and because they're further away from opportunities, etc. And so when we get the transport system functioning and correct, and we are driving tourists to local communities, and as my friend would say, dropping them in the center. What this does, and if done correctly, and this is where I'll let politicians off the hook here, because there's this constant perception that it is a politician's responsibility to create jobs, which is an incorrect assessment to make. What us as politicians and policymakers need to do is create environments for industries to create jobs, all right? And create policies and direction for local economies to grow. And so it becomes very important from a local government point of view to say to thriving entrepreneurs within township areas, what is it that you need to be able to sustain your business and to be able to employ unemployed people in your community. So we have it's a brilliant example of this very thing happening in a community in Cape Town called Bonteheuwel. which is about 85,000 residents, and unemployment sits at about 73% of the people that are eligible to work are unemployed. So a young lady started a coffee shop in this community. And the interesting thing is she pumped herself on social media, got a lot of media attention around this coffee shop, and now she has tourists flooding to her coffee shop from all over the world on a daily basis. What she's been able to do with the help of local government is to relax regulations around functioning, having businesses function within communities. So a lot of the red tape that ordinarily would be there stopping people from functioning businesses from their homes, etc., are eased and are seen through. But what it has done is that within her community, she's been able to employ 10 or 11 young people that would not have had a job before. These people are now working, earning an income, and are able to make use of public transport, able to function and to move on. So it's critically important that not just should transport and tourism match up together, but you should actually look at economic development, tourism and transport, because the impact for local communities becomes an irritation to local communities when they don't see the fruits of their labor and they don't see their communities moving forward despite people coming in. Whereas if we are, as government, putting the right policies in place to ensure that local business people are able to function as a business, then seeing the tourists come in, benefit from that experience, and that turns around to see job creation. You slowly start picking away at the unemployed and creating employment. People have jobs and they are able to better their circumstances because of a policy direction from above. And so these things do become critical. But again, it's discussions between stakeholders like airlines, it's discussions between national ministers and stakeholders where there is one set direction that says tourism must partner with transport, but there has to be an economic development for the people that are affected by the tourists coming in and out of their community. So it's critical because the chain cannot end at the top. The chain ends at the bottom. And the bottom person is the person that should be positively affected by someone from outside of his culture, outside of his country, coming to see what it is that he's doing in his place. So that's very critical that we ensure that we're linking those three things together.
Thank you for this example, which clearly shows how interlinked, interconnected the entire system is. A very impressive trickle-down effect it has if all wheels are coming together. We have approximately 10-15 minutes before we wrap up. I'm looking around and also behind. If there are any questions, if at any point you want to come in with questions or remarks, please do so. Did you have your hand up, gentlemen? I don't know if we have a microphone is coming to you right behind you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. Elliot is International Chamber of Shipping. I went to school in Pretoria, so naturally my first question has to do with Cape Town and my city bus. Having grown up in South Africa, I'm aware that there's the minibus taxi system, which generates quite a bit of income. And it's usually the main mode of transportation within South Africa, for many of the locals anyway. So my question is, what is the relationship between this My City Bus initiative and the local transportation system, if you see what I mean?
Angus, please.
Thank you very much. It's good to have someone from home close by. Good. Look, so he's correct in saying we have a unregulated minibus industry in South Africa. This industry saw an opportunity when things like the formalized transport systems such as buses and trains were not functioning. Minibus taxis came in and really is an unregulated, self-regulated environment happening there. The relationship between the minibus industry and the MyCity industry is a very important relationship because of the fact that taxis are not regulated. You find yourself that should you drive MyCity buses more and more and more at the detriment of the taxi industry, you start messing with something you don't want to mess with. You know, it's a very dangerous industry to do. So what we've done is we've built relationships between certain route suppliers, minibus taxi route suppliers, and we've been able as a city to buy out those routes from taxi operators. And so taxi operators in effect become the owners and we call them VOCs, where they actually run the My City buses in certain areas. So for an example, the Cape Town Mitchell's Plain route. Mitchell's Plain, one of the very big townships in Cape Town. It's a thriving route for minibus taxis. We are trying to formalize the system and getting people quicker in and out of the city center. So we would negotiate with that taxi operator, be able to buy them out, employ his drivers, employ his business to own their own My City business, and so very much formalize that industry in that way. It is a challenge because, you know, a taxi industry would not want to see a limit to the amount of money that gets spent in this thing, but finding that relationship between the taxi industry as well as the My City industry to bring them together and to give them ownership of the system. I think that's critically the most important thing, is people look after, people take care of something they feel they own. And so to create ownership out of this for taxi operators it's probably the most important thing in this. So there is that relationship. So thank you very much for your question.
Thank you indeed. And we already have the next two questions lined up, the lady and then the gentleman in the first row.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Carole Escolan from UIC, the International Union of Railways, and I'm the head of Unit Sustainable Development. My question is, when I work on sustainable development, I think, first of all, of climate mitigation, pollution, protection of resources, and I wonder how you can see smart tourism, a smart way to develop tourism so that we have the lowest carbon footprint, the lowest carbon emission, so that we can reach the Paris Agreement and the 1.5 degrees, knowing the fact that the IPCC last report was quite scary, saying that all countries should have to triple their level of commitments in order to reach the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. You want to take this?
I can start responding to this broad question. I think it's an issue for all of us. It's an issue for governments, it's an issue for private operators, but it's also an issue for the tourist himself, you know. And we need to act with all of these actors at the same time to, at the end of the day, make the difference. I think airline industry just explained how airlines are moving at the level of destination, being country or local. There are plenty of things we can do to improve the situation, to make, for example, tourism transportation more sustainable at the local level, to reduce the congestion problem, to push people to use more active transportation like biking and cycling at the local level. It may seem sometimes small initiative, but small initiative cumulated, they will make a big difference. That's for sure. There are a number of actions which have also been taken directly with the tourists, like specific passport to educate tourists about behavior in terms of transportation. The hotel industry has been doing a huge effort to improve energy efficiency or water efficiency. So there are plenty of things there which are done, but I think we have have to accelerate. We have to speed up. Clearly, transport is the major element of impact for the tourism industry. So I think this is a good question and a good arena to discuss this. And I think we have to do much more to do this. And this is there are plenty of responses can we bring to this. So I think it's a collective effort that needs to be undertaken, small and big. And also government, for example, when they design their tourism policies, they have to put this at the center of their policy. You know, in Europe, for example, many countries are looking towards China, towards India, towards all of these long-haul markets, which in itself will have a big impact on the impact on the footprint, you know, for tourism. So, what does it mean? You know, so I think it's a very broad discussion that we're having. I think we are making good progress, but still.
Very broad, but very important discussion, of course. Thank you for bringing up that question. Of course, it strikes a nerve also, a core in Iceland as well, Minister Johansson.
A few remarks. There, of course, is no simple answer to your question. I agree with Alan, but one of the answers is the energy shift from diesel and those fuel over to electricity, methane, and hydrogen and other things. And I think every country have to look into their possibilities in doing that. We in Iceland are so lucky that 85% of all our energy we are using is renewable energy. The only not renewable energy is that we are importing for transport in cars and in ships and airplanes, of course. So we can see that we have that aim and are working with the policy that by 2040 we are carbon neutral, and at that time we will probably see that 50, 60, 70% of all cars are electrical or hydrogen or methane or something else, and also by some various transport systems you will be walking more, you will be biking more, you will be using other possibilities. But it is an international challenge for the tourism about the airplanes and their energy. But I believe that we will see, as Adriana mentioned, biofuel, better benefits of the fuel in the airplanes. So I'm sure we were going there, but it is a challenge for the tourism because it will grow.
This is a trend that's rather going up instead of down. Adrian, you've already touched upon this in your initial remark. I want to give you a chance, perhaps, to add another sentence.
Thanks for the chance again, just at the risk of repeating myself. Aviation, we've got very ambitious targets to halve our carbon emissions by 2050 compared to 2009, even though we're going to double the growth. Still not enough. We need to do more. We need to go to carbon zero. The only way we'll do that, electric engines and biofuel. And biofuel is coming, but currently it's only about 0.01% of fuel supply in the world. So we've got to ramp up production. And I was saying in the Middle East, we've got some ideas. We've got some experiments on this, producing biofuel from saltwater plants, for instance, which is an algae. These sorts of things, these coming along. But it's a sector issue. Airports are doing the same. They are now accredited. They have accreditation schemes up to level 4, which is carbon zero. A lot of airports now are doing very interesting things with their rubbish collection. I don't know if you know Gatwick, Los Angeles do anaerobic digesters for all their food waste. So they produce energy from the food waste. But I think ultimately, as you said, Elaine, tourists will not choose airlines or hotels that don't produce this story because they won't fly with them. We already get a lot of questions from our passengers on what we are doing about carbon emissions. Single-use plastics is another one. We had our first single-use plastic-free flight last month to Brisbane, long-haul flight. It's very difficult to do this stuff because it's the whole of the way where, you know, the way we live is with single-use plastics. If you imagine going home and getting rid of all your single-use plastics, it's quite difficult. But it's a great question. It's the question of the age. We cannot grow unless we fix this.
Cannot grow until we fix this. Obviously, a question that has been on the minds of many here. Gentlemen, you're next.
Very good morning, Andy Fuchs, Toyota Mobility Foundation. So I'm not the mothership, so I'm not trying to sell you any cars here. We are more to support societal change. And I found this discussion very interesting. But I want to refer a little bit to the theme of this conference, regional integration. And one thing I think that is yet not so developed is this discussion, what it really can do to bring our countries together. If we look at Europe, we have many regions that face a big problem in transport. Younger people moving to the cities, putting the pressure on cities, on infrastructure and everything. On the other side, the challenges on the countryside, because people are moving away. Tourism has a wonderful chance to develop, again, regions. Looking French-German border, being German, we have this region along the French-Belgium-German border, which is the most underdeveloped one. Big stress. If we manage to look not only inside our transport systems, cross-border, we might develop new business models, putting away the stress from cities, because we develop job opportunities on the countryside, which will end this spiral moving away into the cities and giving opportunities on the countryside. I found the example from South Africa perfect. A normal coffee shop, I think the coffee beans might be a little bit different, but what a power this has. And we have many regions. I look to the Metz regions, they have the cider. On the German side, we have the Riesling. If you want to travel there, you only can do this by car. There is no connectivity, there is no regional integration, and it's 50 kilometers away from each other. And I think just in Europe, there's so many examples where tourism could have a positive impact, and looking then at renewable energies, transport systems, be it train, autonomous vehicles. I personally don't see them in the city, but in these regions with low transport offers, this could be really solutions for the future. And I think this opportunity could also spread the development of regions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this remarks, which brings it all together, brings this panel and this discussion beautifully together. We started this panel with the scene setting of Alain Dupeyras. I want to give you a chance to close this panel with perhaps a final remark. Well, what do you take with you from this discussion? You were kind enough to kick us off. What do you take with you for your continued work at the OECD?
On my side, what I would like to say is that, and then if we think about the future and if we look a little bit forward, is that we need to strengthen the regional and the local structures that are governing tourism and transport development locally. So it's about governance capacity, and sometimes we have very good capacity at the national level, but when we come to the regional and local level, it's not at that level. So we need to strengthen this capacity if we want to cope successfully with this growth, and if we want to make this growth more sustainable and inclusive and stronger also in the long term. Second, I think we need to better align transport, tourism, regional, rural policies together to make sure that they are consistent one with each other, that they are supportive one of the other, and that at the end of the day they will make the difference, and that the public money, for example, which is spent on all of these policies and program and investment for the future is makes the difference, So this is very important, I think, to continue to progress, because we are not starting from zero, to align all of these policies together. I just mentioned a few of them. We could think about other policies together. And we haven't spoken, and third, we haven't spoken too much today about data and knowledge and information, but of course, coming from the OECD or ITF, I would not say something different, but I think this is critical, And I think in transport we are a bit better than in tourism, but still I think we need to develop the appropriate knowledge and data and information, and you are doing a lot on this to measure all of this evolution, all of this progress, not only at the national level, but also at the regional and local level, which we know is more difficult, and to support all of this policy development. I think this is very important.
Ladies and gentlemen, prosperity through connectivity, tourism and regional sustainable development, clearly an issue that is going to be with us for a long time to come. But I think despite this being one of the very first sessions of the ITF, despite this being a morning session, this was a very lively one. And I think many pointers that you, both on the panel but also in the audience, believe took many pointers with you for the way ahead, ladies and gentlemen. Minister Johansson, Alain Dupeyras, Jacko, Adrian Gain, Angus McKinsey, thank you so much. This is your applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.